In 1483, two young boys entered the Tower of London. They were the sons of a king, heirs to the throne of England. Within weeks, they vanished without a trace. No bodies, no explanation, no justice. For centuries, their fate remained one of history's darkest mysteries. But the truth, when it finally emerged, revealed a crime so calculated, so brutal, that it would haunt the English crown for generations. This is the story of the princes in the Tower. England in 1483 was drowning in blood. For 30 years, two royal families, the House of York and the House of Lancaster, had torn the kingdom apart in a brutal civil war known as the Wars of the Roses. Finally, in 1461, Edward IV of York seized the throne and brought a fragile peace. He married Elizabeth Woodville, a beautiful commoner, and together they had 10 children. Their eldest son, Edward, was born in 1470, intelligent, charming, and destined to be king. His younger brother, Richard, was born 3 years later, gentle and devoted to his older sibling. The boys grew up in luxury, knowing that one day young Edward would wear the crown. But fate had other plans. On April 9, 1483, King Edward IV died suddenly at the age of 40. He had been sick for weeks, weakened by years of excess and warfare. His 12-year-old son, Edward V, was now king. But there was a problem. Young Edward was at Ludlow Castle, hundreds of miles away, under the protection of his mother's family, the Woodvilles. Edward IV's younger brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, had been named Lord Protector in the king's will. He was meant to guide young Edward until he came of age. But Richard had never trusted the Woodvilles. And now, with the old king dead, a dangerous power struggle was about to begin. Richard moved fast. On April 29th, he intercepted young King Edward V on the road to London. With a show of respect and ceremony, Richard took custody of his nephew. He arrested the Woodville escorts and sent them away. The boy king was now completely in Richard's control. Richard brought Edward to the Tower of London. At the time, this wasn't sinister. The Tower was a royal residence where kings traditionally stayed before their coronation. Young Edward was joined soon after by his 9-year-old brother, Richard, Duke of York. Their mother had hidden him in sanctuary at Westminster Abbey, but Richard's men convinced her to hand him over. The two princes were together in the Tower. They were seen playing in the gardens, shooting arrows, waiting for the coronation. But Richard, Duke of Gloucester, had no intention of crowning his nephew. On June 22nd, a priest named Ralph Shaw gave a sermon at St. Paul's Cathedral. He declared that Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville had been invalid. Why? Because Edward had allegedly been pre-contracted to marry another woman. If the marriage was invalid, that meant Edward's children were illegitimate. Bastards, not eligible for the throne. 3 days later, an assembly of lords and commons declared Richard of Gloucester the rightful king. On July 6, 1483, he was crowned King Richard III. The princes, now declared illegitimate, remained locked in the Tower. Their uncle was king, and they were in his way. At first, the princes were seen regularly. They played in the gardens. They practiced archery in the Tower grounds. Visitors reported seeing them at the windows. But as the summer wore on, the sightings became less frequent. By late July, the boys had been moved to the inner apartments. No more public appearances, no more glimpses through windows. By August, they had vanished completely. No official announcement, no explanation. The sons of Edward IV simply ceased to exist. Rumors spread through London like wildfire, whispers in taverns, fear in the streets. What happened to the princes? The answer, many believed, was murder. And the killer was their own uncle, the new king. No one witnessed the murders, but the evidence points to a horrifying conclusion. According to later testimony, Richard III ordered his trusted servant, Sir James Tyrrell, to do the deed. Tyrrell recruited 2 men, Miles Forrest and John Dighton, to carry it out. Late one night, The men entered the prince's chamber while the boys slept. They smothered them with pillows, holding them down until they stopped breathing. The bodies, it's believed, were buried hastily and secretly somewhere within the tower walls. Richard III never spoke of his nephews again. When asked about their whereabouts, his officials gave vague, evasive answers. The boys had simply disappeared, as if they'd never existed. For Richard, the problem was solved. The last threats to his crown were gone. Richard III worked to erase the princes from history. He commissioned propaganda declaring them illegitimate. He rewarded those who supported his claim and silenced those who questioned it. But he couldn't silence the rumors. Across Europe, courts whispered about the murdered princes. It became Richard's greatest scandal, a stain on his reign he could never wash away. In 1485, just 2 years after taking the throne, Richard III was killed at the Battle of Bosworth Field. Henry Tudor, a distant claimant to the throne, defeated him and became King Henry VII. The Tudor dynasty had begun, and they would ensure that history remembered Richard III as a child-murdering tyrant. For nearly 200 years, the fate of the princes remained a mystery. Then, in 1674, workmen were demolishing a staircase in the Tower of London. 10 feet beneath the stairs, they found a wooden chest. Inside were the skeletons of 2 children. The bones were small, fragile. One skeleton was larger than the other, consistent with a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old. They were found lying together, as if they'd been buried in haste. King Charles II, ruling at the time, believed these were the lost princes. He ordered the bones to be placed in an urn and buried in Westminster Abbey, among the kings and queens of England. The princes, if these were truly them, had finally been laid to rest with the dignity they were denied in death. In 1933, the bones were examined by scientists. They confirmed the skeletons were 2 children and the ages roughly matched the princes at the time of their disappearance. But the examination had limits. DNA testing didn't exist yet. The true identity of the bones couldn't be proven. In recent decades, historians and scientists have called for DNA testing. If the bones could be compared to known descendants of the royal family, the mystery could finally be solved. But the royal family and Westminster Abbey have refused to allow testing. The bones remain sealed in their urn, untouched. Why? Some say it's out of respect for the dead. Others believe there are secrets still worth protecting. Not everyone believes Richard III was guilty. The Richard III Society argues that he's been unfairly vilified by Tudor propaganda. They claim Henry VII had just as much motive to kill the princes. They were threats to his own claim to the throne. Some theorize the boys were killed after Richard's death, not during his reign. Others suggest the princes weren't murdered at all, but smuggled out of England and hidden away for their own protection. But the weight of evidence points toward Richard, the timing of the disappearance, the refusal to produce the boys when challenged, the testimony of Tyrrell and his men, who later confessed before their own executions. Whether he ordered it himself or simply allowed it to happen, Richard III bears the responsibility. The murder of the princes had consequences that echoed for centuries. It ended the House of York's grip on power and paved the way for the Tudor dynasty. It gave us the image of Richard III that endures today, the hunchbacked villain, the child killer, immortalized in Shakespeare's play as one of history's greatest monsters. But more than that, it revealed the brutal reality of medieval power. In an age where succession was everything, children were just obstacles to be removed. The princes were guilty of only one crime, being born with royal blood at the wrong moment in history. To this day, we don't know for certain what happened in the Tower of London that summer night in 1483. We don't know if the bones in Westminster Abbey are truly the princes. We don't know if Richard gave the order himself or if someone else acted in his interest. Some secrets, it seems, are meant to stay buried. This has been the story of the princes in the Tower, one of history's darkest royal mysteries. If you want to hear more forgotten stories of power, betrayal, and secrets from the past, Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. The next video is already waiting. Thanks for watching.